For this painting today, I've got my palette set up. I've got my brushes selected out here. Let me just go through that real quick with you, but my water sources up here, spray bottles here, my sponge for cleaning my brush. My palette, let's look at the palette. We're gonna paint with, I've got in the palette, I've got turquoise, cobalt turquoise blue, I've got cobalt blue, I've got manganese blue. For my shaders, I've got lunar black, and I have neutral tint over in that corner. I have burnt sienna or raw sienna here, Hansa yellow, and I have new gamboge here. So those would be my yellows in my triad. For the red, I'm just going to lean to the warm red. I'm going to lean on cadmium red. I'm not going to go with I'm not going to put a cool red on. I want to mix up some warm greens, and I want to have a variety of yellows to help mix those greens with. The teal, I'm in a pretty much teal blue, cobalt teal blue. I'm primarily going to use that as an accent color. So I'm going to lean a lot on my warm and cool blues, my warm red, and my cool and warm yellows, with my raw sienna being a neutral yellow. I have a couple of special colors over here. Of course, my permanent white gouache. I've got Yana Brilliant and Yana Brilliant 1 and 2. If when we get to the end of the painting, I might use these, reach for these colors. Sometimes I like to lighten up my flesh colors, my face colors with these. And I've got lavender if I want to put a spot of really nice bright blue on it. This, of course, you can mix close to a lavender with your cobalt blue. You just have to work it down with some of this white gouache to get that to happen. But I've got these are my primary colors for today's painting. I'm just going to set those over here. I have quills set out. I've got a few rounds set out, and I've got these liner brushes, linear script brushes. This is a knife brush. So are these three right here are knife edge brushes. If I get this one wet, you'll be able to see that just a little bit better. And they come to a really nice fine point. I can do some detail limb work, or I can use use it to do straight up pulls, things like that. Liner brushes to do calligraphy with. So I've got those chosen. I'll just put those over here off to the side. I'm going to paint primarily, however, with my quill brushes, and I've got a number 10 and number 12 here that I'll reach for. If I want to do some spattering, and I may do that later, I'll reach for this Da Vinci Spin Synthetics, because you can see you can get some really nice action out of that brush. We'll just see if that becomes a technique I want to use in the painting. So I'll put those aside. I'm going to work primarily with the initial washes with these brushes here. And I'm going to build the painting into a triad. So I'll have the shapes I'll have a background building up here with that large dome structure, the bell tower here. And I'll put an accent black up here, nice high contrast up here. I'll have an entry door down here to the cathedral that I'll use as a reverse out. I'll reverse out the trees from the door, so that'll create a nice little pop. And then down here I'll have my dancers. So I'll create this triad of darks and lights that'll keep the eye in this section of the painting. Off to the side here, I'm going to put some more figures to just populate this little area of the painting, this third of the painting with people. And all my color, primarily my bright colors, will be located in this area. So I'll create this really nice rhythm in the painting, and I'll get a really nice L-shaped composition out of that. So let's get going. So I've got my brushes, I've got my quills. I'm going to start with this quill. Let's get it clean, just make sure that it's clean. I'm going to come over and mix up a brown a stucco or building, ancient building, kind of light gray brown. Let's get a little gamboge into this. Lots of water. I want this to be more watery than even tea. So I'm mixing up because I just want to do an initial light wash up on this part of the painting. That's getting there. A little bit more here, just a touch of red into this to warm it up. That's pretty good right there. I think we can start with that. I want to spray the paper in this top part here just with just a couple of taps of water, so that I'm painting onto water on top of the paper. It's got a little bit of inertia to it. So here goes the first wash. And for this, I just want to work the side of the building. I want to introduce shapes that will say building. As I work over to the bell tower, I want that to be a very thin structure. So I'll start with it fairly thin like this. Bring that shape over. Maybe a couple of dots of paint out here, just where we'll do some line work, and we'll put some stratification to that part of the bell tower. I'm going to bring this shape over here, just so as I work that tree or the organic shape over the top of it, I've got a little bit of something going on there. I don't think the building actually goes over that far in the photograph, but I can work that in on top of I can work the tree in on top of that. And so there's my first wash, down to about 2/3 the page. Might fill in some of this. Let's get a little bit more of this going. Just drop in some strokes, just so I get a variety on that surface. Like that. And then we'll put the brush down because we have our first wash down. The background, and I just wanted to ghost that building in. Again, when I put the bell tower in, I can darken that. I can put some darks in there. I'm going to lift out that little hole for the bell tower right there. Let's just clean this up a little bit. And that'll be a good start right there on that shape. So we'll let that dry up. Let it start to dry. The next shape I'm going to work is going to be this organic shape, the organic tree shape. Now the photograph shows palm trees. We don't have to be a slave to the photo. I can work a palm tree, or I did a sketch earlier today of this scene, and here I'm just trying to create the idea, the visual idea of some kind of organic shape, and I use spatter. So I spattered and then I lifted out in the sketch, but you can see there's the creation of the bell tower in the sketch, and there's the cathedral. This scene is a really nice action scene with dancers and tourists and whatnot. But going back to this tree, I'm just indicating the tree in this sketch. Now I can, if I choose to, I can articulate these palm trees if I really feel like they're important, or I can choose to push them back and make them less important, which might help keep the eye in this area of the painting. Again, you can see this triad going on, this visual triad, and then all my color is going to be in this section of the primary color. The pops of color will be in this section, this belt line, if you will, of the painting. Got a little bit of blue up in there. That really just sort of is to help push this scene forward. Anyway, so that was a sketch I did earlier of the scene, so you can see where we're going as we build this. Now this area of the paper and this area of the paper is completely dry, so I can work on top of that. And let's start building that green. So I'm going to go to the smaller quill, the number 10. Make sure it's clean. Grab a little bit of water, and I'm going to work that. I've already got that brown, that light tone of brown. So I'm just going to introduce some of this cobalt blue into this. A little bit of red. That'll give me a nice dark kind of brown gray. And now we can work in some more of that, of the raw sienna. And now I can start building in some greens. So I'm going to keep pushing it. A little bit of Hansa yellow. And I can start mixing a bright green off to this side of the palette. And I'm mixing my colors all in the center of this plate of the ceramic, so I can build out different colors. A little bit more blue here. Clean that. Bring in some new gamboge into this. And I'm reaching for that gamboge because I can start to build a little bit darker value green with that. And now I'm going to bring in just a little bit of lunar black as a neutralizer, sending it even darker. So I have bright green and dark green off to this side. Bring in some paper to test our colors. Yeah, look at that. Nice dark green there. That'll work out great. So I'm just going to come up and start laying in over the top of that building shape and into this corner some shapes. Brush strokes, I'm using staccato primarily. Just building out that shape. Let's clean this brush and start introducing some of this bright green into the mix. And I'm just leaving a few of these little breaks, these little sky holes. That allows light to come through that shape and just gives it a little bit more definition. Palm tree, I could add some palmy shapes to it, but I'm not sure I really want to describe that as a palm tree. So I'm going to leave it a little bit nebulous. I got a little exuberant up here. I want that bell tower, so I'm going to lift that green back like that, and then I can still put the bell up in the bell tower there. Let's get a little more blue. A little more yellow. Again, I'm using raw sienna. I'm still painting with my triads of primaries, even though I have this raw sienna, which is more of a neutral brown, but it has a lot of yellow characteristics, and I can use that yellow. And we'll bring some more of this over. Some more darks in here. Let's go up in that corner with dark. And I'm going to bring this down to about 2/3 of the page. I'm going to work it down. Just have to be careful because I want to paint that dancer as a negative shape. A little bit of, let's get some more of that bright green. We'll just introduce a little bit of that bright green here. More Hansa yellow. And so I'm getting a really nice variety of greens, just working a dark green and a light green. And the influence of the red, just the touch of that red, of that cadmium into that's a ton of cadmium. But let's get a little bit more blue going, a little bit more green, and then we can introduce a little bit of that cadmium red into it. And as those colors begin to work with each other on the page, the red will break out, and I'll get that variety of yellows and greens and browns from the influence of that cadmium red. See if we can force that a little bit more than we have right here. Something like this. All right, and then there's the shape. There's the shape of the trees. Now that green is going to move across this page, and so I can begin to kind of firing in. I can begin to bring that green across like this. Put a little more dark over here. And I'm just pulling that green down, pulling some of that, and over. And that will be the foundation for the lower vegetation that's taking place in the background area here. I mean, I need to get my rag ready because I'm pooling water. Let's put this down. And I just want to be able to lift out some of that pooling, control it a little bit. Put a little light up on that shape. Same thing there. And I can break up a little bit of this with just a touch. And so there's that background tree giving me the whole foreground to begin working the dancers and the people. And this part of the paper is completely dry. So I'll just lift out some of that. And I can go back into this later and I can overspray it and lift out. I can hit it with water. I can put texture on it as it begins to dry up. But look at how that's breaking out. That's partly the gamboge that's in the mix. Gamboge is a color that will break out from others, and it will give us this kaleidoscope of lovely things, especially with the blues. Cobalt and ultramarine those are good colors to work with gamboge because they will break up and play as you mix them, so you get this variegation of color. Just keep that in mind as you're selecting colors to paint with. I do have this manganese up here, and this is my cool blue. I'll use it. I'll create some other washes. We'll go over the top of that with the manganese, and it yields a brighter yellow. So for the moment, now I'm pretty well done with that wash. So I'm going to clean up my tray, and I'll have area to work for our next washes. So the top part of the painting's pretty wet right now. I can come down into this section and I can work these foreground figures in and working toward my dancers. And again, we're going to paint those in a negative shape. So I want to be careful when I get down here and just take my time carving out those shapes. I'm going to reach for a round brush now. This is number 10 round. And I'm going to also be using this number 6. This is an Arches brush, and it is a synthetic squirrel hair or squirrel. I think it's a squirrel brush. I also have a number 8 that I can use. So I'm going to reach for these because they're very, very soft, and I can push a lot of color with them. So let's get them ready to go. They've got nice body to them and nice points. They're a little bit, because they're so soft, they're a little bit difficult to work with because the body of the brush will bend and move, but it's great for pushing color. I've got my number round. This is a Kolinsky round. Got a little bit of white on it. Let's get rid of that. This is the Kolinsky round. I'm going to come up and introduce the tree trunks while this is still a little bit damp. So for that, let's get some raw sienna. Let's get some lunar black. I'm going to touch into this a little bit of neutral tint. And now I'm just going to mix this. So there's my brown. I've got a good brown going by neutralizing that raw sienna with the lunar black. I get a good brown going. Now I can start working that brown. Put a little red in it. That's more like a neutralized red, or like I'm trying to think of the name of that red. That's a little too red for me, so let's keep pulling it back to brown. There we go. So now I have the influence of that red in the brown. And I have a variety of browns and darks in the color mix. Let's start with this mid-tone, then we can, it's like an Old English red. I've got a couple of those browns sitting there. So let's grab a mid-tone red. We'll come up in here into this part of the thing and of the tree, and I'll just bring some strokes down, introducing the idea of tree trunks. Bring those down. I'm reaching now for that darker mix over here. It's got a little bit of that neutral tint influence in it. Put those in. And I can go back and then just lift out, and I can rough up that surface of those trunks just to kind of blend them in a little bit. Like this. And I'm going to take my knife while I have the opportunity. I'm just going to, again, rough up, using that, rough up the bark area. So if I really wanted to go back and articulate a palm, I could do that. I'm introducing the idea of a tree or vegetation that's got a rough bark to it. And I'm doing that while it's wet, drawing that pigment out, creating some texture and some line there. Here, let's get a couple going up there. And so that is there's my tree trunk. I'm just going to spray that little bit right here where I drop that dark brown in, and I'm just going to ask that color to leach out a little bit and to blend into the green with that introduction of that spray. It'll just cause that color to just set down and flow out. And so there, I've given meaning to this green. I've attached it to the ground level, and here's where my dancers will be. So that's all damp and wet. This is still damp over here. So let's go over and take this opportunity to work on our foreground figures, and because this area of the paper is still very dry. But before we do that, though, maybe we'll just take a few minutes and let me just look at this. I think I'm just going to drop in a few more greens. Once I've done that, then I'm going to just let this whole thing dry for a few minutes. I'm introducing a little bit of that cobalt teal blue. Here comes some raw sienna. Here's a green. It's a very pale green. little Hansa yellow on one side just to brighten that up a little bit. And now let's go back into this shape and drop in a little bit more dark. I really like that color breaking up like that. So I'm not going to do too much in that area, but I want to get some bright greens down here. Introduce a few bright greens over here. And again, when I carve in that church door with the dark, it's going to pop that out. Mix up this bright green here. And I'm just going to touch it into the tops up here like this. A little bit here. Right there. Leave that. Now I think we'll take a few minutes and we'll just let this dry up so that we can work on our foreground and we can see what's going to happen with this green shape up here. Okay, so now that we've completed the first part of the painting, we've let this settle up and dry just a little bit. We've got our major background shape. It's ghosted in. We have our foreground tree. This is anchoring that corner of the painting. We can begin to work on our figures, which are the main stars of this painting. And to do that, I'm going to mix up just a lightly tinted, let's clean this palette once again. I'm going to mix up a color, just a light version of this cobalt blue that I can sketch with, because I can lay color on top of that and it will be a nice shadowy kind of color. And I can start to work on these figures over here. Now I know I want white shirts and I want my heads all about at this level. So I'm just going to drop in a little marker that'll tell me that's where I want my heads to be. And then my dancer, I'll put her head here. And the other dancer, I'll put his head here. So that just tells me where my figures are going to set in terms of height relative to everything else on the page. I will paint in background figures after I've done these two guys up here, because I'm going to put more description on them. Let's see. So let's get a gray blue going. And for that, I'm going to drop in a little bit of red and get a purple, a little bit more cobalt. And now let's introduce a little bit of lunar black and neutral tint, more cobalt. We'll test this color before we paint it down. A little bit more water. Bring our test sheet up here. There's my gray. It's a gray blue, leaning a little bit more purple. So let's introduce a little bit more cobalt blue, like right up here. And just a little manganese. It'll help pull out my blue. There we go. There's that gray blue that I've got going on there. By spraying that, I could leach out that color so we could see it just a little bit better. That gray blue. Now, I'm going to set that aside, come back to my figures, and I'm going to work on these two guys over here. This guy's going to have that gray blue for his shorts, pants, and then I'm going to pull the shirt up out of that color. So let's get some legs defined here. Clean this brush, clean water, and I'm just going to draw that color up like this to create the torso up into the neck area like this. Let those colors just kind of marinate with each other. And down here, I'm just going to drop in some legs. Pull that out of that pant, the bottom part of the shorts, and there's my figure. I've defined my figure. I can have him coming, at this point I can make him coming toward me by putting red there, or I can darken that head and have him walking away. Let's work on the second shape. And for this one, I'm going to go around his shirt with this sketching blue that I mixed up, because I want that shirt to be negative. So I'll just sketch that like that. And that pops out or creates the opportunity for that shirt. And now I'm going to work on him, some shorts. So I'm just going to mix up some raw sienna with my purple blue. And that'll shift it to like a purple brown or russet kind of color. And now I'm going to come over and just describe his shorts, his walking shorts, like so. Again, define his legs. Like this. And clean my brush. I'm just dropping in a little bit more dark into this and make those colors kind of work together. Those shapes work together. And then I'm going to grab some raw sienna, and I'm going to formulate his legs out of raw sienna, like so. Bring them off the page. Let that just set up. And so there's my two figures. I think I will eventually have them coming toward me, so I'll put red faces on them. But they're described right now in that region pretty well. Don't have to do too much more on that. I do see some puddling going on here, so I'm just going to grab a rag and just take the edge. Take the edge of my rag, go down there and just interrupt that a little bit. Bring some of that back. And by just touching the edge of the rag in, I'm pulling that water out, but I'm still leaving the pigment behind. And there's those figures. Now let's work on our dancers. So the dancer, the female figure of the dancer, I'm going to paint her as a negative shape. So as I work with her, I'm going to probably start by dropping in a marker for her head. I'm going to grab a neutral, and I'm going to carve around her shape. And she's holding out her skirt with her hands. So I want to get that. I want to get that shape as best I can. I want to describe that as best I can when I paint my neutral color around her to carve her out like this. Seeing that little Those little lifts right there are her hands holding her costume up. And then there she is. She just sort of appears. But this has, I have to do this delicately. The calligraphy of that shape is described by how I handle the background. The same thing for the male figure. So I'm going to come around his head, line up his head. Let's give us a marker, say here. And then I'm going to paint negatively around him. He has a very simple shape because he's essentially just sort of walking around this female shape. And so I can combine a lot of his limbs and everything, but I want to make sure that I get him described as a negative, and then I can paint over him and add some details to him as we go. But that's the general direction I'm going to use to describe these two dancers and their shapes. So here we go. This is the scary part of the painting. Because you really want to get this right. So I'm mixing up that blue, and I'm coming in here and I'm gonna look for, I put those blue marks down as heads. They look like they're a little bit high relative to these two guys. So I'll probably have to drop their heads in just a little bit higher. Something like that to line that up. Now let's get going on that. Let's start working. And because I've got a background color that I'm popping her out of, I can use that to begin to describe her. Let's drop this down. I think I went a little too low. I'm going to lift that back. And let's bring her down quite a ways, but not as far as these guys. And her other hand is up here. Like that. That might be enough. So let's curve this down, bring her down like here, and that describes her negative shape there. See, I've got her going up. I'm going to correct this just a little bit more, add a little bit more lift to her arm. There she is. See how that hand will be way up high and this one will be a little bit low. And here comes her dancing partner. And we'll bring him down to about the same level. And that describes them. Now I want to grab some water, and I just want to weaken some of those lines that I put in to describe them. That's how I got my shape. And I'll augment those edges later with darks. But let's bring some of that dark blue in and around them so it'll join them to the background. Something like that. And we'll carry that dark blue over here on the other side of this guy. And so now there's my dancing figures, my foreground figures, and I've got a nice area back here that I can work the background people in a few minutes. Okay, so now over here, I have a whole threading of dark shapes, and I can build this area up with darks. But for right now, let's just let this set for a few minutes. Seconds, not minutes. Because we've got our shapes, we've got our figures, we've got our building, our ghosted building in, we have our tree shape in. And the next thing I will do is pop in some of these background people. I'm going to reach for for this number 6 round for this. Let's just put this aside. And I'm going to paint these people, sketch them in with some bright colors. So I'm mixing up this cobalt teal blue, getting it to about 2% milk. I'll clean my brush and get some cad red. Get some of that going, about 2% milk. Clean this brush. Let's see what other colors do I want to work with. Gamboge maybe. Let's get some gamboge going here. Nice bright yellow. Nice bright warm yellow. Let's get a little Hansa. I think I've got to get that green out. Hansa yellow here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to decorate this region between the dancers and these two figures, these foreground figures, with bright colors. So I'm just going to put some bright color here. A little bit of bright color here. A little bit more here. Bring that underneath that arm. Maybe a little more teal. Cobalt teal, let's drop that in right here. And now I have the basis for my figures. A little bit of neutral tint. And I'm going to come underneath some of these figures with some darks like this. That'll help define their legs. There are their legs. I can break this up. Let's get a clean rag to do this. Just want to lift some of that back and push them back a little bit. Again, I want their heads to be lining up like that. And I'm going to go dark on their heads because they're in the background. So I'm going to take that purple blue. Let's test that color. It's good dark blue. And here are the heads, so I'm going to drop them in right about here, 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 like that. And those are the background people. A little bit of water. And there are the background people indicated. So I've got people up front, background people, my dancers, and I'll darken up this this edge over here in just a few minutes. Let me lift this back. It's puddling quite a bit. And now I've got that sketched in. I'm going to stay with this same round brush. Let's put these aside. Now I want to start working on some foreground shadows, and then we'll have most of the large, look at how I'm trying to keep the bright colors down here. And I've got color up here and I have color up here, but my bright colors are down this way. So I'm going to get this brush with some water, and let's see, I'm going to start working on some of the shadow areas. And now that, let's clean up the palette for that. These shadows can be, they can be made with almost pure cobalt blue. I have a little bit of that gray left. But I'm going to mix up a watery, almost pure cobalt blue. Get that going. Again, this is probably way past, it's more like tea. And I'm going to introduce a little bit of cadmium red right here. Push it a little bit purple. So I'll have a variety of blues and purples to go into these shadows with. There we go. I'm going to spray this down here. You want to see how wet? That's still pretty wet in there. So I need to be careful. I'm just going to tap the trigger and throw a little bit of water in here. And now I can come in and start painting the shadows underneath these figures. Painting the shadows under these figures. And the shadows are lineal. They run across the page, so I can just start dancing those shadows and painting into the wet to give me these broken edges at the end, or at the bottom end of that line. Bring that across here like this. Again, more blue. Bring that through my figures, and there's some shadows. Now I can start dropping that purple in. Introducing some of that as like varieties in the shadow, variety of light and dark inside the shadow. A little bit of dark here, maybe a little dark underneath, the purple being dark. Put that underneath her, maybe underneath him. A little bit down here, maybe over here. Call that good. There's the shadows in the foreground. I think a little bit more here. Just get a little bit more of this red going. Darken this up into the corner maybe. And so there's the shadowy area underneath the dancers. And with that, we have pretty much all the major shapes described. And we've got our shadow down on the ground. We can then, from this point forward, we're going to start punching darks and punching lights, putting some detail in to create the interesting connection of shapes across the painting. So I'm going to come up here and work on the bell tower. So let's get some neutral tint, add a little cobalt blue to it. A little bit of manganese. A little bit more neutral tint, I think. Now, when I paint the curves of the door and the bell tower, I'm going to rotate my brush. I think I'm going to reach for a liner brush for this, script brush. So I'm going to rotate the brush, turn it in my hand. So I'll set the brush, and then as I pull it around the curve, I'm going to rotate it, spin it in my hand, which will help create the curve. It'll draw that brush around the curve. So I'll set it. This will be a real wet mixture. Set the brush, and then as I come up, I'm going to I'm going to spin the brush. As I bring it around, it'll help me get that curve. So here comes the bell tower. Set the brush and start to spin it. And bring it down. I'm going to go up and paint the top of that arch. Bring that down. Lift out that bottom edge there. And let's do a little work on that right there. That creates the bell tower. Lunar black, and we can indicate the bell. Just with a few darks into that mixture. And there's the bell tower. Let's go over and do the door at the same time. Same basic process, only this is going to be a larger arc. So I'm going to come over here right off of these trees, and I'm going to bring that brush up, begin to spin it, turn it, and bring it down. Let's clean this one up just a little bit. Now, the interior of that is going to be totally dark. So I'm just going to come up here now while it's wet and introduce that dark. See how it pops that green foliage out. Like that. Let's clean up this edge. And there's my door. I think that still needs a little bit of work. Okay, there's my door. Now I'm gonna go in like I did there and just lift out some of the lower edges just to put some light up in that area. Maybe add an additional touch of dark up to the top here. Create some dark variety within that hole that I created. And that triangle that I was talking about is right there. All right. Now we'll put some lines and some marks on that building in a little bit, but let's go down and work the shadows on our main figures, these dancers. So she has some kind of an ornamental, it's an ornamental like apron that's dark, and we can use that. We can use that white area, the negative, to create that apron. And so I'm going to come up into this area and just sketch in that apron like this. Clean up the edges. Maybe give a little indicator that it's going around that way as an apron. And I'm going to put some variety on that shape just by lifting out a little bit. And then she has a cord, some kind of, again, costume thing that comes off of her neck down like this. Again, these are decorative things. I can put a little red into this like that and break that up a little bit. Let's put some absolute red up there and a little bit here maybe, just to kind of break that shape up a little bit. And so that helps to define her. Let's go get some blue because she's in shadow, and she's wearing white, but we want to a little too blue maybe. Let's water this down. And we're just going to go in and describe her costume with this blue, like this. Up into here. Lift this back. Just so I have a hint of that blue. And I'm going to do the same thing on this guy. I need to start pulling the painting together. With darks and lights. Let's put their faces in. Let's see. I think I'm going to use a red, like an orange, because she's wearing a red covering on her head. So I'll put her face in like this. I'll put his face in like this. I'm going to lift his out because he has a hat. I don't have to put the hat in, but maybe that would be a good thing to try to describe. And now my two figures up front here, let's put some red in on them. So now they're coming at us. I'm going to lift back some of that dark and put some pure red on one of these, like this. Like this. Give her a hand up here where she's holding that out. Okay, now I'm going to start popping in some darks. So for that I want a fairly substantial brush. Going back to this number 10 round. Neutral tint. Cobalt blue. And here comes some, I'm going to just start popping some darks in around these figures. Neutral tint, cobalt blue again. And let's start introducing some colors. I can cut around this guy's shoulder. darks right here. And let's put a few dark marks here. That just helps push those people at us. Like this. And let's clean that up a little bit. Like that. Let me see. Right, maybe on his leg, I'm just going to set some darks in here. Let's take our spray bottle and break those up. Like that. Put some darks up in here. Here. And then I'm going to reach for my liner. And I'm going to just put some marks up on that building, little white, some white highlights, and we'll pull this together, tie it together. So let's get our knife edge, and we'll come up here and grab some of this purple again, and put some architectural lines in that help us to see that's a constructed, man-made structure. Come across here like this. Here's an edge. Put that window in. I'm going to lift that back, indicate that. I'm going to come over here and put some architectural lines in, some decorative darks. On the window, I want to get one of those, maybe one or two of those lamps. So let's set the brush, pull that down, come up here, and we'll put a lamp shape up here, and maybe another one over here, but a little bit closer to us, so we'll make it a little bit thicker. Lamp shape up here. Let's lift back some of these darks, put a little variety in that. And some paver lines maybe. It might help us see perspective. Let's come underneath her with a shadowy line. He's pretty ill-defined at the moment. Let's see if we can give him a hat. And then bring that down maybe. I think we're going to lose him. We'll see what we can do about bringing him back. I'm going to lift this dark back out and go back in and punch that red a little bit better. Maybe a little bit dark down here where he is. just want to lay a line, a shirt line on him like this. Pure red. Pure red. More red. Let's give her a little bit more definition in her hand, like this. And we'll give him a hand, maybe a little red here and here. Let's just punch. Let's put a little punch on this pole, like this, and maybe a little bit of line across there, something in here, like that. I'm going to put a little bit of tone on this part of the building right there. Maybe a little bit here. And that's about it on the building. Now, the very last thing we're going to do is add some gouache, some highlights, and we'll be done. I need another brush. Some highlights up here on the window. Put some highlights inside that light. Up on top. Something like that. Maybe we can describe that door. Like that. Let's put a highlight on this guy. I think I need more gouache. Put a highlight here. That's still pretty wet. Highlight here. One here. Bring that down. Highlights here. And we'll call it done. I could mess with this all day, but I could put a little more shadow on her to make her a little bit more interesting. But primarily that's pretty well there. Come underneath this shadow with a little bit of water, make that dissipate some. Maybe just a little bit of throwing paint down here to break up that corner. And there's our painting.